I've got a problem, guys. Diablo 3 Season 29 was recently announced, and it sounds fun. Now, my issue with this, of course, is that Diablo 4 just came out. I've been playing Diablo games for years, and I always love to engage with their endgame and just play and play and play until the season is over. I absolutely did not think that by any means I would be excited for Season 29 of Diablo 3. I thought I would completely ignore it and just continue to play Diablo 4. But Diablo 4 has a lot of problems that we're going to dive into. Now, I do want to note that I want this game to succeed. I have been creating Diablo content for close to a year now, and I really do want to see this game go in the right direction to bring people back, because we have had a mass exodus of players lately and a lot of negative feedback. So let's go ahead and dive into some of the things that Blizzard needs to look at. Now, the first thing I want to go over is this live service model. This is marketed as a positive thing to us players. They're going to update the game, and all the money that we're going to spend on these cosmetics are going to be put back into the game to improve it. But I don't see that. Yes, I understand that they've been making patches and such and trying to improve the game, but the same exact thing happened in Diablo 2 and Diablo 3. If I compare the immediate changes that happened to Diablo 3 over the course of the first few months of the launch, it's pretty comparable to what they're doing in Diablo 4. I don't feel like all this extra money that they're getting is really going back into this game. It sure doesn't feel like it, at least, because this is really common for pretty much any online game, regardless of whether or not it's called live service. Game developers have tried really hard to make live service sound like a benefit to the consumer, but the community at large of gamers seems to kind of see right through this, and I wish that they would just take a step back and kind of just admit what it is. And what it is, of course, is a greedy cash grab. Let's go ahead and take a look at something real quick. So in my last video, I had mentioned that this is my favorite cosmetic in the game. I think it looks incredibly cool. The problem is you can't get this by just playing the game. This armor does not signify any accomplishment that I've had in Diablo 4. It's quite the opposite, actually. It just shows that I got suckered into spending money on this game to look cooler than everybody else. Now, I personally think that this harms the integrity of the game. I think when you see a player who looks like this, it should signify something. It should be, maybe you get a cool transmog when you beat Uber Lilith, something that looks like this. At least something to show that you have some kind of major accomplishment in the game. But right now, the reward for beating Uber Lilith is a red mount that kind of looks like the red mount that everybody else already has. While we're on the note of this live service model, let's go ahead and talk about some of the changes that they have made since launch. In the 1.1.0 patch, they massively reduced our survivability and our damage. The developers were even quoted for saying, "We know it's not fun." Now, of course, power did need to be tuned back because these malignant hearts add a lot to our character, and so I understand that it had to be pulled back a little bit, but why wasn't this considered prior to the launch, and why was it not communicated to the community prior to it happening? On top of that, playing on the Eternal Realm feels absolutely terrible now. With that reduction in power, you really feel it when you don't have those malignant hearts to bring you back up. Now let's go ahead and talk about some of the open world changes that they have made since launch. At launch, the open world had some amount of relevance to it. Now, all monsters are 5 levels lower than us for the vast majority of our experience. The rationale from Blizzard was supposedly that they want us to feel like we're getting stronger when we level up, because people were complaining that it kind of just feels like you get weaker when you go up a level. The problem is that this did not fix that at all. All it did was completely make the open world absolutely irrelevant to the experience. Of course, in Season 1, malignant tunnels suffer as a result of this. Going and just farming these malignant tunnels that they introduced as a seasonal theme is pointless, because all of the monsters are generally going to be 5 levels lower than you, giving you absolutely irrelevant XP. Although, of course, it's nice to be able to instantly port to a nightmare dungeon now. Once again, we're just skipping this open world. Why did so much time and effort go into designing this open world that we are just trying to actively avoid at all costs? Speaking of avoiding the open world, density buffs to nightmare dungeons in a huge way. XP buffs to completing a nightmare dungeon. Everything to nightmare dungeons. Just go do those and ignore everything else. Helltides, why bother? You can get Forgotten Souls from salvaging gear now, so you really don't have to worry about it. Maybe go grab a few Fiend Roses, but I wouldn't stick around for long. And the worst part about this is that Helltides were really fun. I still do them because I do enjoy them, but at the end of the day, they are so much less efficient than just running nightmare dungeons right now. And I think that it was largely agreed upon by the community that Helltides were one of the best parts of Diablo IV. They were a great way of engaging with other players and taking advantage of this open world, and it's just too bad that they feel less and less relevant now. Now, of course, we did also see some monster density buffs to the Helltides, but the mystery chest price also went up as a result. Ultimately, considering these two things together, I do think that that was a good change. However, it was really weird how they implemented it. First, they just made the mystery chest cost more without increasing the mob density. The order at which they're making changes to this game is really obscure. That huge nerf patch in 1.1.0, this happened before the season started. There was still everybody on the Eternal Realm, and we were all just suffering from this. Why not make these changes at the same time? It's like they're momentarily ruining their game, and as a result, they're getting review bombed on Metacritic. Here we are, Metacritic user score 2.0 based on 8,100 ratings. In fact, I remember when the game launched, this actually had an 8 point something as the user score. But the way that they're making changes to this game and the order that they're implementing things is just ruining their reputation. Okay, so next up, let's talk a little bit about itemization. My first complaint about itemization is just how tedious it actually is to review each item after you go through a dungeon. So just a very quick example of this, look at my chest here. We have % armor on the 3rd slot. If we go up to my helm, you'll notice it's on the top slot. It would really be nice if they implemented something kind of like Diablo 3 had, where, for example, if an item had your main stat, it would always be at the top, so you could quickly identify if it had an affix. Just in general, a lot of the affix locations were predetermined, whereas in this game, they can roll anywhere on the item, so it kind of just makes you strain your eyes looking top to bottom to see what does this have. My next complaint is that there are just way too many junk affixes in this game. Let's go ahead and take a look at an image. Honestly, what is this, guys? This is crazy. The additive damage list is out of control, and there's just so many garbage stats too. Plus potion capacity, plus drop rate to potion. I mean, there's just so many things that you would never want on your character. There are way too many stats, and there's so many conditional stats too, like damage to injured, to close, to distant. Honestly, what this feels like is just outright artificial complexity. It's really not that complicated. It's like just a bunch of garbage, and then you have some good stats. You got your main stat, your crit, your vulnerable, your crit damage, and then a bunch of garbage. I do understand that they need to have some kind of filler stats or less than ideal stats, because every single piece of gear that drops, you don't want that to be a great piece of gear. But the list is just out of control. Now, personally, what I would like to see is a ton of these useless affixes just outright removed, and less gear dropping in general. I want to kind of get gear that's good at the same rate, but I don't want to spend a whole bunch of time sitting at the vendor just selling a bunch of junk and straining my eyes. I definitely don't want every single piece of gear that drops to be some godly piece, but I do want it to be better on average, and I want to see gear less often on average, and to compensate for the loss of gold that we'll have, because we're not going to be selling items all the time, I think that monsters could just drop more gold. Now, it sounds like Blizzard is going to be going in the direction of a loot filter, which is fine too. I think that's an okay solution as well. But at the end of the day, I'm honestly hoping when it comes to expansion time, they just completely redo itemization. It's so bad right now. It's so ugly to look at. It's all a bunch of conditional nonsense. And what we generally want is the stuff that's not conditional, just the stuff that works. Yes, there are a few conditional stats. For example, damage reduction against close enemies is good. But for the most part, we don't want that conditional stuff. We want a consistent character that just works all the time. Now, we had briefly mentioned it earlier, but let's go ahead and talk about level scaling in this game. It's kind of been an over-discussed topic, so I'm going to hit it pretty quick. Now, the complaint of people getting weaker as they level up, I want to dive into that just a little bit. I don't necessarily notice this on a level-to-level basis, but I definitely start to notice it in the mid to late game. Right around level 60, when I've got some pretty solid sacred gear, I finally got that crit hit damage, vulnerable, my gear is generally pretty stacked up by roughly 60. I go and clear the capstone dungeon, move into World Tier 4, and then I will go farm the open world a little bit on those level 75 monsters. And at level 60, farming these 75s, when I've got good sacreds, it's a piece of cake. They die so quickly. Maybe my survivability is a slight issue, but I feel really strong for a level 60. That power just continues to rapidly rise as I then start to get ancestral items, and I can really start to feel my strength coming in. Approximately level 75 to 80, I think I hit my peak strength. I can mow absolutely anything down. Same level content is an absolute joke. Farming things 10, 15 levels higher is not difficult by any means. But of course, get to level 80, and at this point you're mostly in all ancestral gear, maybe a few exceptions for some good sacreds, but your character is pretty much put together by that point. And then you're just grinding nightmare dungeons over and over, very repetitive content to get to 100. With each level, at that point in time, I start to feel slightly weaker. And where I really notice this is on bosses at the end of nightmare dungeons. In that 60 to 80 range, pretty much any build that I'm playing, even one that's generally weak against bosses, can absolutely shred them. I've leveled 5 characters to 100, and I notice this on each and every one of them. The Barbarian going in at 60 to 80 against a boss, Whirlwind would just shred them in a matter of seconds. Doing equal level content on that Barbarian when I hit 100 was a very different experience. The boss took much longer to kill because 80 to 100, we're not getting that many gear upgrades, and we're just getting the 4 Paragon points per level compared to, you know, when you hit 50, right off the bat, you've just got 25 Paragon points to put in, and you are way overscaled for your level at that point. So still, to this day, I do think that level scaling is an issue, but of course, this is not really something that they can fix. If they're going to fix this, this is going to have to be kind of an expansion overhaul of the entire game. Of course, level scaling does come with its benefits, but there are some drawbacks. I don't like feeling weaker at level 100 than I did at level 75. Oh god, let's talk about the end game. The end game is a slog. There's nothing to do. Even the content creators, you watch what they're doing. They're all just leveling new characters constantly. A lot of them playing hardcore, and hardcore in this game is sure pretty tempting. I've never been much of a hardcore player, but I gotta say now more than ever I'm a bit interested in it, because getting to 100 is where the game really just slows down. Let's quickly compare this to Diablo 2 and Diablo 3. In D2, getting 99 is you're not going to get to 99. I know in D2R they recently made some changes and people are actually getting to 99, but it still takes a substantial amount of effort and time, way more than getting to level 100 in this game. So throughout the course of an entire season in D2, even if you log on and you just play for a little bit, you're going to get just that much more XP towards your next level, and that feels good when you log off. On top of that, Diablo 2 has a very thriving trading economy, and so just playing the game and going for that super drop is really exciting. I don't think that I've ever felt in Diablo 2 during a season that I've just ran out of things to do. You can always get richer, go farm high runes, do whatever. It just feels like there's more going on, more to aspire towards. Diablo 3, the endless Paragon system comes with a substantial amount of problems, of course, but every time I logged on and I played the game, I was playing endgame content, and I'm making progress every day, no matter what. When I log off, I have a few more Paragon levels, and I'm just that much more powerful than I was before. Diablo 4. I log into my level 100 character, I go farm nightmare dungeons, I get no gear upgrades whatsoever. Maybe I farm some gold and want to trade with somebody, but there's no trading in this game. Yeah, there's third-party websites where you can organize trading, but it just doesn't exist inside of the game, and so as somebody who's just playing and you're not tied into these third-party communities, who are you going to trade with? It is so difficult to communicate with other players and actually initiate some kind of interaction with somebody. Now, of course, the end game does have Nightmare Dungeon pushing and Uber Lilith, so two things. There's two things you can do in the end game, and they're both aspirational content. That's it. There's no leaderboards. In fact, farming higher level Nightmare Dungeons is just less effective than farming lower level ones because you're just getting gear at a slower rate. The higher ones don't seem to get you more gear per hour, not even close. It's substantially less. So as far as being efficient in an ARPG, you're actually hurting yourself by trying to push up and up the ranks of the Nightmare Dungeons. And then there's Uber Lilith, and of course we briefly talked about her earlier. A red mount that looks very similar to another red mount. hey, look at this sweet red mount and all of the Lilith petals coming off the back of it. The only issue with that is not the Uber Lilith mount. So it's just like, I don't really get it. There's no incentive to really go fight Uber Lilith other than to try and test your skill, and that's great and all. But once you beat her, you've beat her, and that's just it. That's the end game. Now, of course, 5 more bosses are coming in Season 2, and I'm excited to see what they do with that, but at this point in time, I'm wondering, why weren't they here at launch? At the end of the day, it just feels like in Diablo 4, there is not much to do in the end game, and it just kind of gets boring. You can log on and play for hours and hours and hours, and log off, and you're pretty much in the exact same situation as you were before. Alright, so to keep this video from being too long, I'm just going to start going rapid fire on all the rest of the issues. Dungeon bosses, way too easy. The mount, super clunky, gets stuck on everything. Why can't I zoom out more? I love getting off-screen by a corpse bow. Who doesn't? Dungeon objectives are so tedious. Inherent backtracking in dungeons. Classes being forced into using specific skills to even be viable. If you're playing a sorcerer, I guarantee you I can tell you what your 1 through 4 buttons are. Campaign bosses were just too easy. I can't re-engage with campaign bosses. New players being forced to engage with Renown and Altars of Lilith, and most specifically Altars of Lilith. It's like they're discouraging people from wanting to play this game in the long term. A player going through the game wants to get invested in it, right? They've got 75 Altars of Lilith and they're getting tired. They are done with this shit. They're not even halfway there. I don't think I've ever met a single player who thought that looking up these maps for Altars of Lilith and going and hunting each and every one of them was actually a fun activity. It was so tedious. And now, of course, we don't have to do it again, but this is so discouraging for new players who are coming in. They're likely not going to want to get invested in the long term of Diablo 4 because they're just going to quit when they're halfway through the Altars of Lilith and they've spent their whole day on it. Quick note, of course, they are getting rid of Renown in Season 2, which I think is definitely a step in the right direction. But back to the Altars of Lilith, third-party websites that we pretty much have to use. Looking up all these Altars of Lilith. Who is actually going to run around the world and try to find all 160 of these? How about helltides.com? Everybody has it up when they're doing a Helltide, so why are we hiding the mystery chest? Instead of being made specifically for the PC, which Diablo has pretty much been built on in the past, they had to make it capable with console, which I feel like really causes a lot of issues and quality problems with the game. Instead of spending their time making this a PC game like it has been historically, of course Diablo 3 did have a console edition that came quite a bit of ways down the road. It was made for PC. It really feels like a lot of this game was made for console. They really just wanted to sell as many copies as they could and get it on every single platform. And I feel like the quality of the game suffered as a result. Speaking of consoles, turning off crossplay in your settings really kills the open world. Let's just run around a little bit here. I've got this turned off right now, and Kiovashad is dead. I would honestly say about every hour I see another player. And this all just loops back to the communication and trading issues in this game. Who am I going to trade with? Who am I going to talk to? Who am I going to group up with? Unless I've got a friend who I'm going to whisper, right? I mean, let's go check the Occultist. That's a pretty hot spot, right? Nobody re-rolling gear. Anybody adding socket? No. No. Okay, the blacksmith. Everybody, I was just talking about how much time we have to spend at these vendors. There's got... Huh. Speaking of trading, how about that gold dupe that happened recently? Want to trade with somebody on one of those third-party websites? You've been grinding gold for weeks and weeks, right? That's completely useless though. The economy's absolutely ruined. Speaking of which, people were of course able to bring their Eternal characters onto the seasonal realm earlier this season and trade. Now, of course, a lot of these players were banned, but this does not completely undo the massive harm that has been done on the economy. Another quick note on itemization. Why are bows useless? It's not just bows. There are so many items in this game that have a stat at the very top, that 40% damage to distant enemies. It's always going to be damage to distant enemies, which means it's always going to be bad. Look at this crossbow with 21% vulnerable damage. All of the crossbows are going to have this vulnerable damage. Why would I ever use a bow? Why would I even look at it? Uber uniques. Why do they exist? Uber uniques. I don't even know if they exist. I'm dead convinced. Every single one of them online, Photoshop. Motorcycle outside my house. Rough place to film. Okay, back to it. Why do Uber Uniques exist? Do they? People have said that you're more likely to win the lottery than to get an Uber Unique after playing this game for years. Stash space is way too limited. There's so many items that I've had to get rid of, so many good things that I'd like to consider using later, but I can't, because I don't have enough space. Oh, I know why. Because every time you see another player in the open world, you have to load their whole stash. Oh, cool, there's a button to undo my skill tree. Why can't I find the... refund all? Huh. I mean, why? Why is there a refund all for the skill tree when you would just have to unclick 50 picks? The Paragon tree has like hundreds of clicks. If you're gonna just add one button, put it on the Paragon tree. Oh, I know why. Because of the Scroll of Amnesia. Of course, another item to take up stash space. Wonder if this will ever be in the cash shop one day. Where is the craft button? And I know I'm all over the place right now, guys, but my last one, and I will never forget this one. Why were balance changes made based on feedback from a level 25 beta? Now that we've seen the endgame, would the Hydra Sorcerer from the beta really be ruining level 100 content? Think about how quickly some of these classes are just clearing same level nightmare dungeons. They nerfed Hydra into the ground. There is no way that pre-nerf Hydra would even be clearing these nightmare dungeons anywhere near the same rate. And now nobody uses Hydra, the one build in the game where you can kind of conjure something up that's going to fight for you, not necessarily a minion, but kind of like a stationary turret. And it's useless now, all because it was overperforming at level 25. Oh my god. Oh my god. Well, to wrap this one up, guys, the overwhelming negative feedback from the community, the mass exodus, people moving away from this game because of poor choices made by Blizzard, I really fear that it is going to harm the long-term health of this game, just like it did in Diablo 3. In my video where I do my final review of Diablo 3, I talk a lot about how the poor launch resulted in a very small player base later down the road. If you have a bad first impression, people are much less likely to come back to your game. And unfortunately, Diablo 4 has set that same precedent that was set by Diablo 3. I really do hope that Blizzard figures this out soon and starts making some really solid changes and adding good endgame content. I know that this video was incredibly negative towards Diablo 4, but I genuinely want to see this game succeed. I've been creating Diablo content for a year. I don't want to watch the game fall apart. I've been playing Diablo since I was 10 years old playing Diablo 1. I do love these games and they're all way different from each other, but I gotta say, I'm a little exhausted with these really lackluster launches. Well, guys, maybe I'll see you in Season 29 of Diablo 3. There is going to be some Diablo 3 content coming. I can't believe I'm saying that. This game, it launched on June 6th. What day is it? It hasn't even been 3 months. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Go ahead and drop a comment down below. Let me know what you would like to see changed about Diablo 4. What are the biggest problems? What needs to be hit right now? As always, I genuinely appreciate you for watching. Thank you so much, and I'll catch you in the next one.